Oh, you want to hear about the Great Swamp Incident? The one where the mighty Galactic Naval Academy's most prestigious cadets got shown up by a human living in what they generously called primitive accommodations? Well, grab a seat and maybe a strong drink, because this story's got more twists than a Zephyrian pretzel factory. So there I was, Commander Vextai of the Rigelian Defense Corps, trying to explain to Admiral Korath why our top-tier military academy had just experienced what the official reports would later call an unprecedented environmental crisis requiring immediate human intervention. But between you and me, the kids got their shiny boots dirty and ran crying to the one person they'd been making fun of all semester. Let me back up a bit. The Galactic Naval Academy, pride of 12 systems, beacon of military excellence, blah blah blah. You know the type. All chrome corridors and holographic training simulations, where cadets from the finest families in the galaxy come to learn how to push buttons really, really well. The kind of place where they serve synthetic nutrition cubes and call it optimized sustenance. Now, our human exchange student, Lieutenant Rebecca Becca Martinez from Earth's Colonial Marines, had been causing quite the stir since day one. Not because she was particularly troublesome, mind you. No, Becca's crime was far worse than that. She was competent, disgustingly, effortlessly competent. While the other cadets lived in the Academy's standard-issue dormitory pods, complete with climate control, entertainment systems, and whatever passes for luxury these days, Becca had taken one look at her assigned quarters and said, and I quote, "Thanks, but I'll pass on the metal box." Instead, she'd requested permission to build her own shelter in the Academy's outdoor training area, specifically in the section known as the Wetland Environmental Challenge Zone, or as everyone called it, the swamp. Now, the swamp wasn't actually meant for habitation. It was designed as a short-term survival training exercise. Drop the cadets in for 6 hours, watch them flounder around looking for the emergency beacon, then extract them before they actually had to deal with any real discomfort. Standard military education theater. But Becca? She looked at that mosquito-infested, humid nightmare of murky water and twisted trees and said, "Perfect. I'll take it." The other cadets thought she'd lost her mind. I mean, who voluntarily chooses to live in a swamp when you could have a nice, sterile room with regulated atmosphere and sonic showers? The Altarian cadets, with their delicate respiratory systems, were particularly horrified. Cadet Zeppelin couldn't even look in the direction of the swamp without her gills fluttering in distress. "But the humidity," she'd whisper to her friends, her translator struggling with the concept of voluntary discomfort. "The insects, the smell." Cadet Thorax, a Centaurian who'd never seen anything greener than a holographic simulation, was equally baffled. Doesn't she know about bacterial contamination, waterborne parasites, the statistical probability of contracting some exotic disease? And then there was Cadet Kylix from Proxima Station, who'd grown up in sterile orbital habitats and considered dirt to be a theoretical concept. He kept asking the instructors if Becca's choice was some sort of primitive human punishment ritual. But Becca just smiled that infuriating human smile and started building. And building and building. First came the foundation, raised on stilts she'd crafted from local deadwood. Then the walls, woven from reeds and reinforced with a mixture of clay and organic compounds she'd somehow extracted from the swamp itself. The roof was a work of art, layered with overlapping plant materials that would have made an architect weep with envy. "It's called biomimicry," she explained to anyone who'd listen, which wasn't many. "You work with the environment instead of against it. Radical concept, I know." The other cadets watched from a safe distance, making jokes about human primitivism and placing bets on how long it would take for her little hut to fall apart. A week, maybe 2 at most. After all, what could some mud and sticks accomplish that advanced materials science couldn't do better? Oh, if only they knew. Now, here's where things get interesting. See? The Academy's environmental systems are marvels of technology. climate control that can maintain perfect conditions regardless of external weather, atmospheric processors that can filter out any contaminant, structural integrity fields that could probably withstand a direct hit from a plasma cannon. What they're not designed for, apparently, is a Category 7 storm system. Yes, you heard that right. A Category 7. The kind of weather event that makes meteorologists question their career choices and insurance companies spontaneously combust. The kind of storm that doesn't just knock on your door, it kicks it down, steals your lunch money, and makes rude gestures at your family photos. It started innocently enough. A few weather warnings, some minor atmospheric disturbances. The kind of thing the Academy's systems were designed to handle with ease. The instructors didn't even bother moving the outdoor training exercises indoors. Becca, meanwhile, spent 2 days reinforcing her little reed hut and stocking up on supplies. When asked why, she just shrugged and said something about reading the sky, which, coming from someone who'd grown up on a planet where weather was something that happened to you rather than around you, should have been the first warning sign. But did anyone listen? Of course not. The cadets were too busy with their advanced meteorological simulations and atmospheric pressure readings. Science, you know. Much more reliable than some humans' primitive intuition. The storm hit on a Tuesday. Because of course it did. Tuesday is the universe's way of saying, "You thought Monday was bad? Hold my beer." At first, everything seemed fine. The Academy's shields held. The climate control systems hummed along happily. The cadets went about their usual routines of complaining about the synthetic food and trying to one-up each other with stories about their homeworld's superior technology. Then the power grid started fluctuating. "Minor technical issue," announced Instructor Valeth over the intercom, his vegan accent making everything sound like he was perpetually disappointed in the universe. "Temporary disruption to non-essential systems, nothing to be concerned about." Famous last words, really. The first system to fail was the atmospheric processing in the Eastern Dormitory wing. Suddenly, 200 cadets who'd never breathed unfiltered air in their lives were experiencing what the Academy's medical staff delicately termed environmental distress, which is a fancy way of saying they were all coughing like they'd swallowed a dust storm. Then the climate control went out in the central hub. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in as many minutes, and the humidity shot up to levels that would have made a Terran rainforest jealous. Cadets who'd never experienced actual weather started panicking like they'd been thrown into the vacuum of space. "This is intolerable," gasped Cadet Zephlin, her normally perfect appearance now somewhat disheveled by the horror of experiencing natural air. "How do beings function without proper atmospheric regulation?" "I think I'm dying," moaned Cadet Thorax, dramatically clutching his thorax, hence the name, I assume. Is this what weather feels like? How did any species evolve past the cellular stage? But the real chaos began when the structural integrity field started failing. See, the Academy's buildings weren't actually designed to handle weather the old-fashioned way. They relied entirely on their technological systems to maintain stability. Take those away, and you've got very expensive, very fragile boxes trying to stand up to a storm that could probably arm wrestle a black hole and win. The first building to go was the recreational facility. 1 minute it was there, all gleaming metal and holographic displays. The next minute, it was scattered across 3 time zones. The cadets watched through the reinforced windows of the main building as their zero-gravity sports complex became a very expensive form of meteorological confetti. That's when the panic really set in. "We're all going to die," whispered Cadet Kylix, staring at the chaos outside with the expression of someone who just discovered that the universe wasn't, in fact, a safe and predictable place. "This is it. This is how it ends. Death by weather." The instructors, to their credit, tried to maintain order. Emergency protocols were activated. Distress signals were sent. Evacuation procedures were discussed with the kind of desperate enthusiasm usually reserved for people, trying to explain why their expense reports are 6 months late. But here's the thing about emergencies. They don't really care about your protocols. The storm was getting worse. The Academy's systems were failing faster than a politician's promises. And everyone was starting to realize that their advanced military training hadn't actually prepared them for the shocking revelation that sometimes nature wins. Then someone, I think it was Cadet Thorax, made a desperate suggestion. What about the human? The silence that followed was the kind of silence you get when someone suggests eating vegetables at a dessert convention. Not hostile, exactly, but deeply uncomfortable. The human, repeated Instructor Valeth, his disappointment levels reaching new heights. Lieutenant Martinez, Thorax clarified, as if there might be some confusion about which human he meant. She's out there in the weather place. The swamp, added Zephlin helpfully. Right, the swamp. She's been living there for months. Maybe she knows something about surviving without technology? The collective gasp that went up from the assembled cadets was audible even over the howling wind outside. Survive without technology? The very concept was so alien it might as well have been spoken in quantum mathematics. But as another section of the Academy's outer wall decided to relocate itself to a neighboring continent, the idea started to look less insane and more like their only option. So they sent a message. A very polite, very official message that basically amounted to, "Help, we're all going to die. Please save us. We're sorry we made fun of your mud hut." Becca's response came back within minutes. Sure, bring sleeping bags. And maybe some humility. Now, getting to the swamp in the middle of a Category 7 storm was not what you'd call a relaxing stroll. The Academy's transport systems were down, the walkways were flooded, and the emergency hover pods kept getting picked up by the wind and deposited in places that defied several laws of physics. But fear is a powerful motivator, especially when that fear involves the possibility of experiencing natural weather conditions for more than 5 minutes at a time. The cadets formed up into groups, grabbed whatever emergency supplies they could carry, and ventured out into the storm. What they found when they reached the swamp was, well, let's just say it wasn't what they expected. Becca's little reed hut was not only still standing, it was thriving. While the Academy's advanced structures were being systematically disassembled by the storm, her primitive shelter sat there like it was enjoying a light breeze. The walls, woven from local materials and reinforced with organic compounds, bent and flexed with the wind instead of fighting it. The raised foundation kept it above the floodwaters, and the carefully designed roof channeled the rain away from the structure instead of letting it pool up and cause problems. It was, in short, everything the Academy's buildings weren't: adaptable, resilient, and actually designed for the environment it was built in. Impossible, breathed Cadet Kylix, staring at the hut like it was performing some sort of technological miracle. How is it still standing? Becca, who was sitting on her covered porch looking completely unbothered by the chaos around them, just smiled. It's called architecture. Been around for a while. You should look it up sometime. She welcomed them in, all 200 panic-stricken cadets, like she'd been expecting them all along, which, knowing humans and their terrifying ability to plan for contingencies that shouldn't exist, she probably had been. The interior of the hut was a revelation, not because it was luxurious, but because it worked. The woven walls provided insulation without blocking airflow. The raised floor kept them dry despite the flooding outside. Small oil lamps provided light without relying on the power grid that was currently having an existential crisis somewhere in the distance. And most shocking of all, it was comfortable. Actually comfortable, not just technically habitable. "This is pleasant," admitted Zephlin, looking around with the expression of someone whose entire worldview was being gently but thoroughly demolished. "How is it pleasant? It's made of plants." "Plants are good at things," Becca explained, settling back into what appeared to be a handcrafted chair. "They've had a few million years to figure out how to deal with weather. Seemed smart to ask their advice." Over the next 3 days, while the storm raged outside and the Academy's rescue teams tried to figure out how to mount a recovery operation, Becca kept all 200 cadets alive and comfortable in a space that, according to their calculations, should have been able to accommodate maybe 20 people maximum. She showed them how to harvest rainwater, how to prepare food without relying on synthesizers, and most importantly, how to be comfortable without constant technological mediation. The cadets, who'd spent their entire lives surrounded by machines that anticipated their every need, discovered the shocking reality that they could actually survive using their own capabilities. "I don't understand," confessed Cadet Thorax on the second day, as he helped Becca weave additional sleeping mats from swamp grass. "This should be miserable. We're in a swamp, in a storm, sleeping on the ground, eating food we prepared ourselves. By every metric I know, this should be unbearable." "But it's not," added Zephlin, who'd spent the morning learning to identify edible plants, and was having what she would later describe as a spiritual awakening. "It's actually nice?" Becca nodded thoughtfully. "Funny how that works. Turns out comfort isn't about having the most advanced technology. It's about understanding your environment and working with it instead of trying to dominate it." She gestured to the storm outside, which was still doing its best impression of the end of the world. "That storm isn't our enemy. It's just weather. Fighting it would be stupid. But if you understand it, if you prepare for it, if you build with it in mind, then it's just another part of the environment." The cadets absorbed this wisdom with the shell-shocked expression of people whose fundamental assumptions about reality were being systematically dismantled and replaced with something that actually made sense. By the time the rescue teams finally arrived, they found 200 cadets who were not only alive and well, but actively reluctant to leave. They discovered something that their advanced education had never taught them, that technology was a tool, not a crutch, and that sometimes the old ways worked better than the new ones. The official report, when it was finally filed, was a masterpiece of bureaucratic understatement. Environmental crisis successfully resolved through innovative application of traditional survival techniques. No mention of the fact that their multi-billion credit academy had been saved by a human living in a mud hut. No acknowledgement that their most advanced students had been schooled in basic competence by someone they'd been treating as a primitive. But the cadets knew, and more importantly, they learned. The next semester, applications for wilderness survival courses increased by 847%. The academy's curriculum was quietly modified to include more practical environmental skills, and Becca's Reed Hut became an unofficial pilgrimage site for students who wanted to understand how someone could be so comfortable with so little. As for Becca herself, she was offered a full teaching position at the academy. Her response was typical of human pragmatism at its finest. "Sure, but I'm not moving out of the swamp. If you want to learn, you come to me." And they did. Class after class of the galaxy's finest, trekking out to the wetland environmental challenge zone to learn from the human who'd made herself at home, in the place they'd all feared. The academy's administrators weren't entirely pleased with this arrangement, but they couldn't argue with the results. Students who'd trained with Becca consistently outperformed their peers in every practical assessment. They adapted better to unexpected situations, showed more resourcefulness under pressure, and demonstrated a level of environmental awareness that simply couldn't be taught in a classroom. More importantly, they stopped being afraid of weather. The lesson here, Becca would tell each new group of wide-eyed cadets as they huddled in her hut during their first storm, isn't that technology is bad. Technology is great, but it's not magic, and it's not infallible. The storm that nearly killed you all could have been survived by any of your ancestors with nothing but basic knowledge and preparation. She gestured to the walls around them, still standing strong despite the conditions that had flattened the academy's supposedly superior structures. "This hut isn't better because it's primitive. It's better because it's appropriate. It's designed for this specific environment, using materials that understand this place better than any engineer ever could." The cadets would nod solemnly, finally beginning to understand the difference between advanced and effective. Years later, when those cadets had become officers and instructors themselves, they would tell their own students about the Great Swamp Incident, about the human who showed them that sometimes the simplest solution is the most elegant one, about the day they learned that survival isn't about having the best equipment, it's about having the best understanding, And every time they told the story, they'd add the same conclusion. If you ever find yourself in a situation where the choice is between the most advanced shelter money can buy and the one built by a human who actually understands weather, choose the human. Every single time. As for the academy itself, well, they learned their lesson too. The new dormitory wing was built using hybrid construction techniques that combined advanced materials with traditional design principles. They kept the climate control systems, but they also made sure the buildings could survive without them. And most importantly, they made sure every cadet spent at least one semester learning from Becca in the swamp. Because sometimes, the most important lesson isn't how to use technology. It's how to remember that you don't always need it. The Galactic Naval Academy is still considered the finest military education institution in 12 systems. But now, instead of just producing officers who could push buttons really well, they produce officers who understand that sometimes the best button to push is the one that turns the machines off and lets you figure things out for yourself. And in a small reed hut in the middle of a swamp that used to be considered uninhabitable, a human sits on her porch, watching new groups of terrified cadets arrive to learn the most important lesson of their military careers. That sometimes, the most advanced thing you can do is remember how simple things work. Not bad for a primitive, right?